The first thing that we're going to assemble is we're going to take the head tilt actuator and attach it to the neck mount. So we're going to start with bag 101 and actuator number 6, which is the head tilt. Now each bag will have its name and the list of components that it has inside on the bag. And each bag will have printed parts along with the hardware needed to assemble that component. So in this case we have one printed part, has threaded inserts in it already. And then we've got a separate bag which has our screws and nuts that we'll need for this step. So I'm going to pour out these screws to divide them. We have several different screw lengths in here. So we've got 8mm screws and 14mm screws. For this step, we're going to mount the actuator into this bracket like this. And this bracket mounts to the front of the robot like that. So we've got the screws to mount it to the robot in here, but we don't need to do that yet. So I'm going to take the longer screws, so the 14mm screws, and then 2 of the 8mm screws. I'm going to set them aside for later. Then I'm going to split the rest of this hardware into 4 8mm screws and the 4 M2 nuts. I'll take these screws that are used to mount this to the robot, to the front of it. I'm going to put them in the bag associated with this part, and I'm just going to set that aside for later. And we'll use that when we get to the step where we connect it. For now though, we want to attach this block to this actuator like this. And to do that, we're going to put 4 screws, 2 on each side, and we're going to bring them through the part, and we're going to put some M2 nuts in these slots on the actuator that will receive the screw. And so this is how the actuator connects to everything else typically. It has these slots where we can put these M2 nuts, and then you can drive a screw through it. To help me do this, I'm going to use this little curved pick tool. You don't need this. You can use tweezers, you can use pliers, whatever you want. If you can just do it by hand if you want. So we're mounting the bottom of this actuator like this. So we're going to use these bottom slots, so all 4 of them. So just kind of set it in there. And then I'm going to take this curved pick tool and just use this to push it down into the slot and make sure that it's aligned. So you can see through it, you can see the threaded hole. You can use whatever tool you'd like. I like this tool because it makes sure that it has a nice, correct alignment. So I'll go ahead and do the rest of these. And these should fit pretty nicely. It shouldn't take too much pressure, and they shouldn't be too loose. So it should just be kind of a firm fit to hold it in place until we get the screw there. So you can see how these fit in, just like that. Now that we've got these in place, we go ahead and align the actuator into the bracket. Make sure we can see through these holes here, in this orientation. And then we can go ahead and insert our screws. So we've got 4 M2 8mm screws. I'm just going to screw them in lightly, not all the way yet. I'll just kind of iteratively go around and progressively tighten them. All right, and I'll go ahead and tighten them down. You don't want to over tighten anything because you can break the plastic, but things should be firmly tightened. So I'm going to set these to the side for later. So next, we're going to take bag 102 and bag 314. In bag 102, we'll find our hardware and our printed part. This is the neck tilt fan holder, and this part attaches like this to the actuator. And then in bag 314 we have the fan that goes inside. Let's go ahead and open up the bag of screws, and we'll just go ahead and get those sorted out. So we've got 4 M2 by 8mm screws and 4 M2 nuts. So we're going to mount this here. So we'll need these 4 slots to have nuts in them. Go ahead and put those in. All right, got all of those in. We're going to mount this like that. Go ahead and align those. They are aligned. And then we will put screws in all 4 holes. All right. Next, we will take the fan, and for all of our fans we want to make sure that we get the airflow direction right. So on each fan there is a arrow pointing in the direction that the air flows. In this case it flows up towards this outer label, and for the actuators we want to pull the air away from them. So we'll want the airflow out away from the actuator. So we'll insert this fan into this holder in this orientation. And this will be a very snug fit, so just kind of carefully slide it in. There you can see, good fit. All right. All right, so I'm going to set this to the side for our next step. So we're going to need, for the next step, actuator number 5, which is the head pan. We're going to need bag 103, which is the pan bracket and the tilt bracket. And we will need bags 201 and 202, which are each actuator cables. So I'm going to set 201 and 202 to the side. We'll use them in a minute. So we're going to start by opening up bag 103. And in bag 103, we've got 2 large printed parts and a bag of screws. And so we also have 2 small printed parts. When the parts are very small, if they're printed, they'll be in the bag with these other small parts. So before we start assembling this, we want to look at the pan bracket itself. We've updated the design on this since we put together the initial kits, but you don't need to reprint the part. If you want to, you can, or you can just modify it by hand. So there was a little bit of a tolerance issue with these holes here that the screws go through. diameter needed to be a little bit larger for the head of the screw to fit through. So essentially what you can do, if you don't want to print the updated version of this, you can take like a file, and you can just file down these edges to make this hole a little bit larger, just so that this head of the screw can fit through it with ease. So this is mostly in case you need to disassemble this later. You want the screws to come out, and if you don't make this hole a little bit wider, they'll get stuck, and it'll be very difficult to disassemble. If you need to remove more material, you can also just use a hobby knife, a utility knife, and you can just take this and just go around the edges and widen up this hole. You also want to be sure on this part, since this part is a part that rotates on an axis, we want to make sure that these holes are nice and round. In this case, just take a file and you just kind of want to go around until you get a nice round hole. It's already been done on this part, it's already been post-processed. But usually round holes will not print exactly round if they're printed in the Z dimension of this printer. So we just want to make sure that we round them out. And again, it's easy. ASA material will just kind of shape easily. Let's take a look at these smaller parts. So this is important for this particular assembly. So we've got this spacer, and we've got a washer. And these are both printed parts. The spacer goes through like that, and this is going to rotate on this. So we want to make sure it's a nice smooth fit, and this can spin freely. And this washer goes around this side, so we just want to make sure that that fits through as well. Now we'll go ahead and sort this hardware out. So we've got a lot of things happening here. All right, so let's get these sorted. First of all, we've got this big M3 screw that's for attaching this tilt bracket. So I'm going to just put that here, and I'm going to put this over to the side because it will attach it to our tilt motor. So next, we've got M2 screws, and we've got some that are 8 millimeters in length and some that are 6 millimeters in length. So we've got 4 of them that are 6 millimeters in length that attach this bracket to the tilt actuator. And so I'm going to go ahead and pull those out, and you can recognize them pretty easily in comparison to the 8 millimeter screws. And those are our 4 6 millimeter screws, so I'm going to put those over here as well. The rest of these are 8 millimeter M2 screws, and we should have, so the way this is going to be assembled is we'll have this bracket this way, and then this will attach like this, and this whole thing will go on here to rotate. And then this motor will go into this bracket like that. So we'll attach these two together, and 4 screws will go through and hold them together. And then this actuator will slide in here, and we'll hold it from the top with 4 screws and through the bottom with 4 screws as well. If you're keeping count, that is a total of 12 screws. So let's make sure we have 12. All right, 12. And then we have the M2 nuts that hold this bracket, so in these slots here. So I have 8 of these. So I'm going to start by putting these M2 nuts into the actuator. So since it's going to be held like this, we'll have these two, these two, these two, these two. So let's start with this side. So let's start by attaching these two together. And so we want to make sure the fan holder is on this side that just has this one large hole, not the side with the large hole and the four holes around it. So we're going to, in each of the four corners of this lower level is where we're going to attach, and you can see there are threaded inserts on the other side. So take one of our M2 by 8mm screws, and we'll just get this aligned. So I'm just going to push this through a little bit, and then align it. And I'm just going to screw it in a little bit to start with. Okay. And I'll do one on the other side. Just hold this in alignment. Just going to push down. And I'll screw this in. Again, not all the way, but okay. So this is aligned. Let's go ahead and put in the other two screws. And we'll go ahead and tighten all of these up all the way. Want a nice strong connection. All right, and you can see there's no gap between them. It's a nice solid connection. Okay, set that here. Now we want to put this actuator into this part, but before we do that, once it's in here, we won't be able to get to the back connections. So we'll need to connect these cables before we slide it into place and fix it. So we'll start with cable 201. And so we're going to take the actuator and look at it from the back side, and cable 201 will go into the right plug. Take this cable and just push it into the actuator like that. And then cable 202 will go on the other side. So plug it in here. And then these will both route kind of in between these two little plastic extrusions. That's what we want to do, like that. Okay. So I'm going to hold them like that. You're going to be careful that all of these nuts stay in place. So this one is quite loose. So you want to make sure that it stays there until we get the actuator into position. So I'm going to go ahead and just slide the actuator in with these cables running beneath it. I'm going to push it forward so that the last set of holes, or the bottom holes in the actuator, line up with these mount points. And so now we'll go ahead and fasten it with some screws. So M2 8mm screws. And I'm going to just progressively attach it. Just make sure we have everything aligned. I'm going to go ahead and do two on the back side here. So these have to drop down through this layer. So drop that in, and it's going to need to push down quite a bit, so there you go. Click down and then it can screw in and you'll feel it. I'll do another one on this side. Same thing, I'll just kind of push it down until it goes all the way, and then tighten it in. All right, that's pretty good. Come back to the front side and do the other two. All right, and then we'll do the last two back here. Drop that in, click down, tighten it up. And same thing here. Push that down, tighten it up, and then we're going to go ahead and tighten all of these fully. Make sure everything is nice and firmly attached. So I've got this nice and firmly attached. I've got these wires coming out here. Okay. So next we will take our head tilt actuator with the bracket and fan mount attached to it. And what we're going to do is we're going to connect this head tilt bracket to this head tilt actuator, like this. So to do that, what we first need to do is on the side of the tilt bracket without these 4 holes, we'll put the spacer through from the outside, like that, and then the washer on the other side, like that. And this will fit over this extrusion with this threaded insert on the actuator. So I'm just going to slide that into position. I'm just kind of roughly aligning it. And I'm going to take this M3 screw and insert it through the center of the spacer and down into the actuator, like that. And I will tighten it a little bit, but just enough to keep it in there. So you can see now this is connected. And so now we need to connect to the actual servo horn on the actuator. So the way we want to do that is we have these 4 M2 6mm screws, and we're going to use that to attach these 4 points to the horn of the actuator. We want to make sure that we have our actuator aligned roughly with the 0 marks matching each other. The way we want to position this when we screw it in is in kind of the closest we can get it to this position where it's straight up perpendicular to this actuator. So we'll line the holes roughly, and we'll just start by taking one of these screws, push it through, and I'll just tighten it down a little bit into the actuator horn there. And then I'll take another one straight across from it and align it and tighten it down. So I'll add the other 2 screws. And go ahead and tighten all of these fully. And then we want to just kind of carefully check that we can still rotate this, and you'll feel the gearing push back, and you'll hear it. And so we've got a nice clean rotation. Now we're going to come to this other screw, and we'll go ahead and tighten it up. It doesn't need to be super tight, but you don't want it to be loose either. So tighten it, and then see if you're still able to rotate with the same amount of force. And if you're not, you can loosen it a little bit to kind of dial in exactly the right feel. All right, and so there we've completed the pan and tilt brackets.